Thank you so much, Albana, for joining us. Let's jump into it. Generative Intelligence Coaching, so important right now. Could you share with our listeners and readers, followers, our friends, why is it important now and how does it work?
Sure. So thanks very much for inviting me for that conversation, Paul. I am thrilled by the opportunity to share with the audience what generative intelligence is all about and what it can bring for them. And it's true that we're living in very peculiar times that are stretching and demanding us in all the directions. But what is generative intelligence? Let's start with that one. And what does it mean to be generative? Being generative means to create results that did not exist before. It is the ability to discover, to create, to enrich, and to strengthen and expand one's resourcefulness with the intention of creating something new in an evolutionary way towards new possibilities and what I call fit for propagation, fit for multiplying that experience or product or whatever it comes.
Right.
Why is that something that is important now? I feel that is important now as I see there are three main pressure points that we're going through. One is the increased complexity of the lives we live and the businesses we lead.
Yeah.
So this is one. The other one, which is not so evident, but is strongly present, is the impoverishment of our collective imagination. And the third one is, of course, my desire to help leaders transition to conscious leadership.
Right.
And I believe this is a pressing need. So to address these three main pressure points, I believe that we need to reimagine and to reprogram how we lead self, how we lead teams, and how we lead others. And that's what generative intelligence coaching helps. I know that as an individual, I am challenged to be more self-aware, more agile, more creative, but also playful, and to be conscious on my choices. I think this is a foundational skill set on leading self. And leading self is important because this same individual is a member of a larger system.
Correct.
And so teams are made of individuals. Leaders are individuals on their own right. And an individual may not step up into leading teams in a larger system, but he certainly needs to step up into leading self, into making choices, being all conscious on the impact these choices are going to have.
A lot of people right now go to us as coaches, as advisors, helpers. They're trying to figure out how to, you mentioned agility, the ability to reimagine, the ability to, I guess, to be intentional. I think this is something that we both are very fascinated with, the intentionality. Could you share with us a little bit more about this relationship between pursuing agility, becoming a little bit more adaptable on an intentional level, and how generative intelligence helps that?
Agility is a capability of flexibility, of traveling light and traveling consciously.
I love that, yeah.
Which means that to be able to do so, we want to balance out a lot of factors and to keep with us whatever helps us to move forwards with a lighter weight.
I love that you mentioned that, because when people develop their generative intelligence, they're starting to let go of what didn't work.
Yeah. So fundamental to generative intelligence is developing that presence and that connectedness with the systemic intelligence, or what I call it systemic resourcefulness. And
Wow.
one moves and one shifts from a state of crash or a state of scarcity
Yeah.
to a state of abundance, to a state of what we call it a coach state, a
Right.
state when we're aware, fully present, and connected with our internal being, with our inner core, they
Yeah.
call it,
Yeah.
and whatever is existing outside.
Yeah.
And that connectedness is what allows us to leave aside whatever might have worked in the future, but we don't need to carry it along anymore.
Right.
Because that new connection, external, internal, is asking for a different balancing in a way that is sustainable. It's light to maintain.
Indeed. Indeed.
Yeah.
It's like it's natural, right? Because of the energy that's achieved through the balance. Suddenly, our perspective on things become a little bit broader. We're more open, and then we start to see the good things, even in the difficulties. Am I understanding it correctly?
Absolutely, absolutely. So we start to see broader, we start to see new possibilities, and that's the thing, we expand. We expand our vision, we expand what is possible, we expand our resourcefulness. And out of that is a possibility of then sharpening that act of balancing. It's not easy to balance and to reconciliate sometimes conflicting calls or conflicting situations or factors.
Right.
And so by broadening and expanding, we become even sharper into that act of balancing. And we become even sharper in our vision.
Yeah.
You see, so the vision can get blurred a lot, especially in terms of
Yeah. Right.
uncertainty
Especially
and
right now,
disruption.
right? Especially
Yeah,
right
that's what
now.
we're living, right? But then it becomes even more blurred when we're looking at the future from a place of uncertainty and a place of scarcity. Now, what challenges that balance is tapping into what we call that coach state, and which allows us to access that creative imagination. And that creative imagination gives us the possibility to look at a disruption, what we often hear as a moment of opportunities.
Right.
No matter how you cut it, there are two sides.
Right.
So a disruption can be painful as it can be, as we are all experiencing that. But in that pain, in that disruption, in that uncertainty, in that ambiguity, there are great opportunities and new possibilities.
Yes, the silver linings, right?
Right. And we have to pick up what can propagate that is fit for the future.
I love the way you put that because for me, the word that's resonant is abundance. Abundance it's the state of true creativity. When we see infinite possibilities, when we can find ways and means to make the seemingly improbable suddenly become possible, and I think for a lot of people this is very important now to be supported on it through a coaching conversation, perhaps the way you describe it, as well as to learn skills like this. I'm sure the listeners, and most of them are leaders of teams, company owners, CEOs. We also have a lot of friends here who are in the people asset community, and I'm imagining a lot of them are asking, when is the fit right? How do we get started? How do they go into this whole practice to develop this generative intelligence, both as a leader and, as you mentioned, from a team standpoint? How do we get it started for these people?
That's a very good question, Paul. I think that from a skill set perspective, starting with generative conversation would be a great start. Okay. And our common mentor, Judith Glaser, used to say that everything depends on the conversations.
Indeed.
So when we step on on those generative conversations, we create a foundation for synergy with those that we interact with. That leads to opening up to that state of presence and trust that everything that we need is in front of us. But then other than that, in fact, identifying let's say, an inner call or an issue or a dysfunction and wanting to pursue in it is the next and even the best way to start with. I think generative intelligence coaching applies best when you're looking for creative solutions, innovative solutions, and when you're not looking for a quick fix. Generative intelligence coaching is more about developing something that is fit for the future, in an evolutionary way, and exploring those possibilities, not only in us, but also with the others. In fact, the best outcomes of generative intelligence coaching come when we want to leverage innovation in the system, with the teams, with a broader scale of stakeholders. Typically, digital transformations. They can happen at a team level, adopting or applying new tools. But more and more, they are impacting the larger system. And leaders of today, those that are leading digital transformation in their organizations, they are challenged to balance three very important shifts from human to machines. The shift from product to platforms, the shifts from core to crowd. And those shifts are not impacting only their team or only their organization. They're impacting the society at large. The HR is working today in our days, on how they can manage the succession of their top talent or of their executives or important employees. But tomorrow, they will need to think what is happening outside of their organization and how they're going to cope with a remote multi-generational workforce that is being shaped in its foundations in terms of their well-being and in terms of their trust in the future and in terms of the fast-paced change of their skill set. So they won't be able to look only internally. They will be challenged to look a lot more externally and coordinating and orchestrating that change with a broader system. And that's where generative intelligence coaching can be greatly helpful.
That's awesome, Albana. And if the listeners and our friends would notice, right, it's like it affects a lot of aspects of the systems that most of us have to deal with right now, because a lot of leaders are setting up the new processes of thinking and looking towards the future. Albana, in ending, would you like to address the group and just share your message of what you think would be the most important thought right now as they reflect on applying generative intelligence to leverage of what seemingly was really a difficult 2020 and how they could face 2021 differently?
I remember that quotation of Einstein, that logic can take you from A to B. Imagination can take you everywhere. And imagination today is more important than knowledge.
That's such a nice way to end it. Thank you so much, Albana. Yes, that's where we want to go. We want to go everywhere, because right now there's so many kinds of, all of these seeming limits, but you're right. Imagination can take us anywhere. Thank you so much, Albana, for sharing your wisdom. And
you're welcome.
My dear friends, I'm very happy to share Albana. She's one of my mentors. Also in our peer group, I look up to her, and wherever you are in part of the world, we have this whole new exciting body of knowledge called generative intelligence, for which Albana is a trailblazer and a proponent and also the developer of this technology. And I highly encourage you to please reach out to her and to her team. My dear friend, thank you so much for joining us in this episode of Transformative Conversations on Generative Intelligence. It was such a pleasure to have you.
With pleasure.